Finally, Ubisoft released its latest financial report, and the result was brutal. Not surprising exactly, because Ubisoft losing money now feels less like breaking news and more like seasonal content. The shocking part is the size of the damage. Ubisoft reported losses of more than $3 billion in a single year, which is not a bad quarter. That is a crater. For perspective, Atari's legendary E.T. disaster helped trigger the 1980s game crash and burned around $100 million back then. Adjusted today, Ubisoft somehow lost roughly 4 times that amount. So this is not just a story about one bad pirate game or one awkward launch. This is a full corporate survival arc, with Ubisoft stuck at one health point. Once, Ubisoft was one of the kings of AI gaming, or according to its own legendary marketing, maybe AI gaming. Assassin's Creed, Far Cry Rainbow Six, Watch Dogs, Ubisoft was everywhere. But recently, the headlines changed. Cancellations, layoffs, stock crashes, restructuring, mediocre releases, and angry players became the new Ubisoft trailer before the actual trailer even started. The core question is not simply why Ubisoft lost so much money. The real question is darker and much more interesting. After all of this, how is Ubisoft still alive? This disaster did not fall from the sky. It was years of questionable decisions stacking up like a very expensive Jenga tower waiting for someone to breathe wrong. Revenue declined, the release schedule got messy, and analysts were not exactly throwing confetti. Ubisoft entered the new fiscal year needing stability, cash flow, and proof that the machine still works. Skull and Bones became the perfect symbol. After nearly a decade in development, Ubisoft called it a game, but players saw a project that arrived from another timeline. Star Wars Outlaws should have been a slam dunk. It had one of the biggest entertainment brands on Earth, yet it failed to create the sales explosion Ubisoft badly needed. Then came Assassin's Creed Shadows, the supposed emergency button. Feudal Japan, samurai, ninja, beautiful landscapes the setting fans had requested forever should have been the easiest win imaginable. Instead, the conversation turned into a public relations battlefield. Stealth and world design were drowned out by controversy, culture war arguments, and accusations around historical respect. That is the bigger problem. Ubisoft is not suffering because 1 or 2 games failed. It is suffering because the entire machine was built for an older version of gaming. For years, the formula worked: big map, towers, enemy camps, collectibles, skill trees, maybe microtransactions. Players loved the scale, investors loved the predictability, and Ubisoft printed sequels. But the market changed. Players got tired, competition exploded, development costs soared, and now the industry is not starving for open worlds. It is drowning in them. That made Assassin's Creed a dangerous dependency. One hit used to cover weaker projects and keep the machine moving. Today, with blockbuster budgets exploding, even a hit is only oxygen. Ubisoft employs thousands across global studios from France and Canada to Singapore, Romania, Ukraine, the United States, Vietnam, and beyond. One successful game cannot magically carry that entire structure. So Ubisoft chased the other dream live service: sell the game once, then keep players buying skins, passes, expansions, seasons, and cosmetics forever. On paper, it sounds beautiful. In reality, live service is a gladiator arena. Fortnite, Call of Duty, Genshin, Valorant, Counter, Strike, League, Destiny, and more are already fighting for every minute of attention. Rainbow Six Siege proved Ubisoft could do it, but Siege was the exception. Hyperscape vanished, and XDefiant showed that being not bad is now just a slower form of death. Meanwhile, the giant factory became too heavy. Ubisoft restructured, canceled projects, downsized studios, and cut roughly 200 jobs in one fiscal year just to stabilize cash flow. Why has it not collapsed? Because Ubisoft still owns valuable global infrastructure, technology, publishing power, and recognizable brands. Wounded does not mean worthless, especially when Tencent is nearby. But Tencent is not a magic healing potion. Ubisoft still needs cash, trust, discipline, and games people actually want. Every new release is no longer just entertainment, it is a survival test. That is why Black Flag Remake matters. Ubisoft is still alive, but survival is not recovery. To escape this ending, it must stop selling formulas and make players care again. Black Flag is not just another remake. For Ubisoft, it is a public exam. Fans remember the original as adventurous, stylish, and surprisingly alive, not as a spreadsheet-wearing pirate clothes. The problem is that modern Ubisoft often cannot resist expanding everything. Levels, more systems, more upgrades, more currencies, more menace, until a simple fantasy becomes corporate archaeology. If the remake keeps the soul, it could remind players why they cared. If it turns every pirate into a damaged sponge, it becomes another warning sign in expensive costume. And that is Ubisoft's bigger crisis. It does not only need successful launches, it needs proof that its creative instincts still work, because players no longer trust the machine automatically. For Ubisoft sold scale as value. Huge maps, long checklists, endless activities. But now players increasingly ask a different question: is this big because it is meaningful, or just big? This is where smaller competitors became dangerous. Indie studios and focus teams started delivering games with sharper identities, while Ubisoft kept chasing enormous worlds that sometimes felt strangely empty. Look at the market today. Can spend hundreds of hours in a free game, or 20 unforgettable hours in a premium game. Ubisoft has to fight both extremes. That makes the old middle ground harder. A $70 game filled with recycled camps and safe design cannot survive on brand recognition alone, especially when everyone has a backlog. The financial loss is basically the bill arriving. Delayed projects, canceled experiments, inflated budgets, and weaker returns finally turned into one massive number investors could not ignore. But companies this large rarely die overnight. Shrink, sell, merge, restructure, delay, refinance, and negotiate. Ubisoft's survival is less miracle and more corporate life support. The assets still matter. Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Rainbow Six, and old names like Splinter Cell carry real value, even if some of that value is trapped under dust. That is why investors do not simply walk away. A struggling Ubisoft is still a treasure chest full of recognizable brands, development talent, tools, and global production pipelines. Tencent's involvement fits that logic, not because Ubisoft is healthy, but because wounded giants can still be useful. The question is who controls the rescue, and what gets sacrificed. And sacrifices usually mean people. Layoffs are often presented as efficiency, but behind every line item is a team losing stability while leadership promises a brighter future later. That creates another problem. If morale drops and talent leaves, the company becomes weaker at the exact moment it needs better ideas, cleaner execution, and stronger creative leadership. So Ubisoft's future depends on more than accounting. Cutting costs may stop the bleeding, but it cannot create passion. You do not spreadsheet your way into a beloved game. The company needs fewer promises and more discipline. Fewer giant announcements, fewer half-finished trends, fewer games chasing yesterday's market, and more projects with a clear reason to exist. It also needs humility. The audience has heard the marketing language before. They do not need another revolutionary open world. They need one game that feels honest. That is why this story is bigger than one bad year. Ubisoft represents a warning for every publisher that confused endless scale with sustainable creativity. The industry spent years believing bigger teams and bigger budgets would guarantee bigger success. The math is breaking, and Ubisoft is one of the loudest examples. Still, writing Ubisoft off completely would be a mistake. This company has recovered before, and the raw ingredients for a comeback are still sitting there. A focused Assassin's Creed, a smart Rainbow Six update, a bold smaller project, or a properly revived classic could change the conversation faster than people expect. But the margin for error is shrinking. Every delay, every controversy, every mediocre launch now hits harder because Ubisoft is no longer spending from a position of strength. That is the strange truth. Ubisoft is alive because it is too valuable to ignore, but it is endangered because value alone does not make people excited. So the question is not whether Ubisoft can survive another quarter. The question is whether it can make players believe again before the oxygen tank finally runs out. The question is whether Ubisoft can remember what made people care in the first place, not bigger maps, louder marketing, or stranger acronyms, but games with identity, confidence, and a reason to exist. Because players are not just tired of Ubisoft games, they are tired of seeing great ideas processed through the same machine until every adventure feels like a checklist wearing a costume. A Black Flag remake could be a turning point, but only if Ubisoft treats it like a memory worth protecting, not another vessel for grinding levels, cosmetics, and corporate monetization systems. Ubisoft still has talent. That part matters. Thousands of artists, designers, programmers, writers, and producers are not the problem. The problem is the corporate machine deciding what their work becomes. That is why the next releases matter so much. Each one is not just judged as entertainment anymore. Each one becomes evidence in the trial of whether Ubisoft can actually change. For now, Ubisoft is alive because its brands still matter, its infrastructure still has value, and investors still believe there may be something worth saving beneath the wreckage. But survival is not recovery. If Ubisoft cannot make players excited again, the oxygen tank will run out, and one of gaming's biggest empires may finally collapse under its own formula.